How many are there? There's about 1,400 seed banks in the world right now, and they are actually protecting 1 to 2 million different seeds. So there is a lot of diversity that we're trying to protect. I've listed some of the names of the most common seed banks just to be familiar with them in case they come up on something. Royal Botanic Gardens in England. US has our National Seed Storage Laboratory that's in New York. There's a Seed Saver in Iowa that keeps all the different types of plants. Mexico, we read about this at the start of our chapter. They have the wheat and corn improvement center. The one that's probably the most famous seed bank is in Sweden. It's called the Doomsday Seed Vault. And there's a little cartoon here about, I'm sorry, in Norway, not in Sweden. A little cartoon here about it. It's actually set in the side of a glacier in Norway, and it is said to be completely able to withstand any kind of huge natural disasters. That could ever happen, that we maybe the rest of the planet could be destroyed, but we would have our secure set of seeds in Norway there. Okay, so we are taking measures to preserve that diversity, so we don't end up only having one breed of corn in the entire world, one breed of wheat in the entire world. Again, I feel like we're spending the whole chapter talking about plants, so I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about animals. Our increase in the need for food has also really impacted the way we raise animals for food. And I know we spent some time this week watching the video on King Corn, which mostly focused on growing corn and growing plants. Next week, we're going to watch a video that focuses more on how we get the animals that we eat. Since the last 60 or so years, we've increased our meat consumption by 5 times, and this really becomes a problem with energy transfer. If you think back to when we talked about food chains and how only roughly 10% of the energy gets passed on from level to level, this becomes an issue because if we've increased the amount of meat that we need to eat, or we want to eat, we don't really need it, but we've increased the amount of meat that we want to be eating, not only do we have to have more animals on the planet, but we're going to have more plants and more primary consumers to feed to those animals. So this becomes an issue with energy transfer. I can't just magically snap my fingers and have more animals. If I want to support more cows and more chickens and more pigs, I have to grow more plants. That instead of having humans just eat the plants, I have to feed those to the animals, give more energy to the animals, invest more energy, and then eat the animal. This is also a problem because of feedlot agriculture, and I've listed some reasons here why feedlot agriculture is potentially becoming a problem. And this is what the video that we're going to watch next week called Food Inc. is going to look at. In feedlot agriculture, we put a lot of our grain doesn't actually go to feeding humans. It goes to feeding the livestock and the poultry. And a lot of our land doesn't actually go to growing plants for our consumption. It goes to raising plants to feed these animals. So 45% of the grain that's grown on our planet actually just is grown to feed the animals, not to feed us. And a third of our land that we use for growing plants is not actually growing plants for us to eat. It's growing plants for those animals to eat. And when you have these huge areas, these huge farms that, just like we have farms for only growing corn and only growing wheat, we have farms for only raising cows and only raising chickens. And when you pack those animals in and you're raising hundreds and thousands of cows in one small area, or hundreds and thousands of pigs in one small area, you're going to have high levels of manure and urine that are polluting the water, the surface water and the groundwater. That can also lead to eutrophication because it's so much fertilizer in one area. If it runs off into the water sources, it can cause those dead zones in the water. Feedlot agriculture also increases our use of antibiotics. You probably consume antibiotic every single day, even though you're not sick, because with all those animals living so close together, the animals are given in their diet antibiotics every single day. And those antibiotics can end up in your milk, in your meat you eat, because it just gets accumulated in the tissue of the animals. Other things, feedlot agriculture increases soil erosion, increases use of pesticides, increases use of antibiotics. It's an increase, it's a stress and a strain on the system. One area that actually has some potential for really good growth and really sustainable growth is raising fish for food. This is called aquaculture. Write yourself a definition if you want to. Aquaculture is just when we raise fish on farms. If we keep aquaculture on the small scale that it is now, it will potentially be a really great way to get protein for many people. Small scale fish farms really don't use very much fossil fuels. They use less fossil fuels than going out on boats and trying to capture fish from the ocean. And if we keep them small, we don't have to use antibiotics. Now, if this runs into a large scale production like some of our feedlots for pigs and cows and chickens, we're going to see the same issues with aquacultures we see up here. But right now, we don't have these issues. Right now, we keep smaller populations, so we don't have to use the antibiotics, but that could change. If the fish are fed grain, this could also become a problem. You saw this issue with in our king corn video. It could become unhealthy for the fish, and it's not really energy efficient because we could just be eating that grain ourselves instead of growing grain just to feed the cows or growing grain just to feed the fish. And it may also become an issue with, GMO. Some of those fish have been modified. If those fish accidentally get out into the oceans, out of the farms, we may have some of those issues that we were just talking about with the corn. So overall, we've talked about all these issues. We know we need to get to a more sustainable situation. We're obviously working towards that. But I want you to remember that sustainable does not mean organic. Sustainable and organic are two different things. Organic is kind of a buzzword we hear a lot now. Agriculture in the United States is definitely moving towards a sustainable future. We're trying to find ways to use less pesticide, less fertilizer, less hormones, less antibiotics, less water, less energy, but still keep our food production high. One way of doing this is organic agriculture, but there are non-organic ways. We can still use fertilizer and just use less fertilizer. We can still use hormones and just use less hormones. So sustainable does not mean organic. Organic is just one piece of the puzzle. An example of a sustainable agriculture that's not organic is happening in Japan. In Japan, they grow a lot of rice. And in these rice paddies, farmers used to just grow rice. And so they'd have to throw into the water with the rice fertilizers, and they'd have to throw in other nutrients. One person in Japan came up with a method, and I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce a Japanese word. Aigamo. Agiyamo, perhaps. It's called the Agiyamo method. And what this farmer started doing, he actually wrote a book about this and is making a ton of money, is instead of putting fertilizer in the water that was growing the rice, he started letting ducks swim around in the water. Now, the ducks ate the weeds. The ducks ate the pests. The ducks, when they pooped and it went down, created fertilizer they didn't have to add in fertilizer, and it kind of became this little self-sustaining system. It wasn't organic, but it was a way of being more sustainable. And this method, the Agiyamo method, if I'm saying that correctly, is taken off in Japan, and they have very sustainable farming methods. They're very successfully. But let's talk about the organic food movement. The organic food really has taken off. Farmers literally cannot keep up with the demand for organic food right now. The Organic Food Production Act of 1990 is what you should be familiar with. This is the law that was passed to define what is organic and what is not. And the main obstacle to increasing production for farmers, increasing production, is just the price. Growing things organically usually means you have to increase the price of your food. It's going to cost the farmer more to make the food, so the price is going to get passed on. And I think I've mentioned this in class before. If I walk up to the case in the grocery store and I see I can get a dozen eggs for 99 cents, or I can get a dozen eggs for $4, sometimes you just want to spend the 99 cents and get your eggs. But this organic movement is really picking up, and more people are choosing to pay the increased price to get the organic food. It's actually very, very difficult to get your crop and your food certified as organic. There are a lot of forms to fill out. There's a lot of government regulations to contend with. Organic also does not mean, does not have anything to do with GMOs. GMO food can still be organic. So when you eat something that's organic, it can still be genetically modified. Organic food just can't have fertilizers, can't have antibiotics, can't have pesticides. From this organic food movement, because it is hard for these large-scale farmers to become organic farmers, there's a local food movement that's really started. Most of the food that you eat has traveled over 1,000 miles to get to you. Most of the food you eat is not from the area in which you live. But farmers markets, we know there's tons of these around nowadays. You see signs for them everywhere you go. And also something called CSAs are helping people reduce the footprint of their food, meaning reduce the carbon footprint. I don't need to eat food that's been shipped to me from across the country or across the globe. I can eat food locally. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. Community Supported Agriculture, and it's essentially like a farmer's market where you work directly with the farmer. Instead of me going every Thursday to the farmer's market to get my food, I talk to a farmer, and that farmer will drop off a box of food at my house every week of local, organic, sustainable food. So there's definitely some push for this, and in the United States this is rapidly increasing, the want of people wanting to have local and sustainable food sources. Okay, so you've spent some time writing down these notes from chapter 10. You now need to work on the chapter 10 targets. Chapter 9 and 10 targets are going to be collected. So if you have any time left in class, finish up your chapter 10 targets. And over the weekend, you need to finish your chapter 9 and 10 targets so you can turn them in next week.